My name is Linda Pantel, and I am thrilled that you are joining us for Career Month 2017. We're presenting a total of 16 webinars this month, and I hope you'll find something that suits your interests. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar titled Creative Careers in Tourism. Our presenter today is Amanda Scotese. Amanda is the founder of Chicago Detours Tour Company and is here to share her experiences and expertise about the tourism industry. It is my absolute pleasure to hand the controls over to Amanda today.
Great, thank you. Basically, we're going to talk a little bit about how people can work in travel. It's an industry that's changing really rapidly and definitely one that people are very intrigued by the possibility of working in. So these are the main points of what I'm going to be talking about. I'll give a little bit of background on my career in tourism. Then we'll talk about the tour industry as a whole. Then we're going to talk about this idea of hyper-local tourism, which is actually a really new term, but it's something that is a big trend along with the experience economy. We'll talk a little bit about qualifications for working in tourism and ways that you can get a job in hyper-local tourism and how to sort of craft an experience. So I started up Chicago Detours in 2010. And we're a tour company. We do all kinds of different tours of architecture, history, culture, and we like to do kind of fun stuff, interior architecture, historic bars. But before I really talk about what it is that we do with Chicago Detours, what makes it hyperlocal and everything, to explain to you how I got here, I had been working as a travel writer on the side for print and online. I wrote for Rick Steves' Italy guidebooks. I wrote for San Francisco Bay Guardian Weekly, different kinds of blogs, different books, magazines. This is just kind of an example of some of the publications that I wrote for because after undergrad, the primary career that I was pursuing was working in journalism. And I got a job working as a tour guide in Italy for a company, Rick Steves. He's got a PBS show all about travel in Italy, and I was working as a tour guide, and then after having worked as a tour guide a little bit, I got in with updating his travel guidebooks, which actually is one of these sort of jobs that people think is really incredible. It was also incredibly grueling, the guidebook research part of things. And then just some other background that kind of led me to the place that I'm in. I was a creative writer from a very young age, like basically as soon as I could craft sentences, I was making stories. I also was very much involved in the visual arts and have studied all kinds of drawing and painting and all kinds of different mediums. I pursued a path of documentary filmmaking. And then found, like many things, it's maybe like 1% the fun, creative part, and then 99% more of the business. I also studied a good amount of art history. I have a bachelor's from the University of Michigan in English literature, and like a lot of people, I changed my mind about my major a ton of times, but ultimately ended up kind of going back to that love of stories, and then that's also where I studied a lot of art history. And then another thing that I think really informs what I do, and it's something that people often don't want to put on their resumes, is that I've worked in the service industry. And kind of a funny aspect of that is that I worked selling cigarettes at nightclubs. But it was actually a job that informed a lot of what I do now as far as interacting with people. I mean, having every night I would interact with hundreds of people, and it taught me so much in communication skills and reading people's body language, and the service industry is a job where you have to really work. So I think it's, anyway, just sort of a side thing, I think it's something that a lot of people kind of think people look down on a resume, but I think it's a great thing to have on a resume. Anyway, I went to the University of Chicago. for my master's degree. It was the Master's of Arts program in the humanities. I knew that I wanted to further my education. I knew that I wanted to be a tour guide here in Chicago. And I really loved the fact that the program had an interdisciplinary aspect to it, because that's just how my brain works. I didn't want to just focus on one specific subject. And that degree really helped me in being able to sort of figure out how to synthesize information, and it also allowed me to really just craft my studies around studying Chicago. So I studied anything from urban geography to I took a really cool course on Black Chicago history. There was a great course on Chicago film. So I was able to really create a more in-depth understanding of Chicago through that degree. And then it's actually going to be after I'd really completed my first year of that degree, which was in 2010, that I started up my company. So let's start talking a little bit about the tourism industry. This is just kind of, basic graph that's showing the expected growth of tourism. It's sort of a little bit on the even keel as you look through 2007 through 2017. But over the next 10 years, it's projected for it to grow even more. The graph on the right is talking about how there's direct and indirect, these different levels at which it affects the economy. And that can be something as simple as, like, we do a tour in the neighborhood of Pilsen, and so an indirect impact is when we go to lunch at a restaurant in Pilsen, which actually we're doing for the University of Chicago alumni this weekend. But tourism is actually considered to be one of the world's largest economic forces, and it's definitely growing. So there's definitely opportunities for jobs. In Chicago specifically, it's constantly growing. There's a lot of factors that affect that. One is simply that word is getting out that it's amazing. It's an amazing city to visit. And then also just this, massive influx of people moving back into the city too, as well as just travel growing. So this idea of hyper-local tourism that I'd like to talk about, it's this growth in travel where people are really seeking more and more authentic experiences that really reflect the unique character of the place that they're in. Now, this word hyper-local, it was first used in 1991 in the context of journalism, and that's where a lot of people know of it from. So what happened is there's, with the growth of the internet, there's been a big growth in the amount of websites that are providing very specific content that could be going direct to a neighborhood, for example. Then you have another reflection of this sort of hyper-local movement is going to be like farm-to-table restaurants. So people wanting to specifically consume the food that is unique to the place and that comes from nearby. And then a big one that's really affecting travel is going to be Airbnb. So more and more people are looking for a unique experience in where they stay. And while this may not be new, you've got boutique hotels and B&Bs and everything, it is very much a reaction to just staying in a chain hotel and really wanting to have the personal experience that Airbnb was originally founded on. You also have where there is a big tourism that's growing around breweries, for example, and people want to go and have the local beer. And this is all, the Airbnb is having this big impact on people being able to really stay out in neighborhoods instead of it just being downtown. So to explain how Chicago Detours, my company, has to do with this, so our sort of main description of what we do is that we bring curious people to explore stories and places locals don't even know through guided tours of Chicago's architecture, history, and culture. So the idea here, and this is something, it's really wild, it's just, in the past few years we're starting to notice all kinds of other companies really talking about locals. And so it's a reaction to, you know, wanting to have sort of a manufactured tourist experience and really wanting to have an authentic one. And kind of what we're saying is that, you know, locals can live in a place their whole life, but we're going to show a dimension that's another step about even places that you think you know, and be able to share a different dimension to the architecture and the history and the stories behind the places that you go by. And so the kinds of tours that we do are going to be, we take people into buildings downtown, we have historic bar tours, we talk about Chicago's jazz and blues history, we go into Chicago neighborhoods, we incorporate food and drink into a lot of our tours. And while we may be sometimes going on a very touristed area, like we have a historic Chicago walking bar tour, which is right at the Magnificent Mile, the most touristed area in all of Chicago. What's so cool about it is that we actually go and point out things in the area that a local might not have ever noticed. You know, here, like our Loop Interior Architecture tour is also right downtown, but we're going to weave through the insides of buildings. We go into the underground pedway system. The right image is going to be a church and a skyscraper. We've had lots of locals that say, I've lived here my whole life. I've been to Dealey Plaza a million times. I had no idea that building had a church inside of it. Or like our Old Polonia and Wicker Park walking tour. As far as I know, we're the only tour company that's really exploring this old Polonia area by Division in Milwaukee, and the Polish history that was there, and like the photograph of Helena. We really tell her story, so it really adds a much more personal element. This is how it becomes more hyper-local. It's very unique to the place. Our clients are going to be anything from, and I'm partly sharing this so, you know, people can get a bigger idea on, you know, how can I think about how to work with this, work in this sphere. We work with corporate groups, whether they're visiting or local, family groups, could be for special occasions, friends, things like bachelorette parties, people's birthdays, kind of a bigger idea on who we work with and who this real growing sector that I think a lot of people are interested in is this idea of the cultural traveler. And there's a lot of studies coming out where they're trying to figure this out because the cultural traveler spends money. They tend to be very educated, and they tend to really be interested in the arts. And then also locals. So this is this very new idea that locals actually want to learn about the place that they're in and know more about where they live. So part of this whole hyper-local movement. So part of this growing sector of the hyper-local tourism has to do with the experience economy. And this is, of course, one of the things that really blew this up was Groupon, of course, started here in Chicago. You have Airbnb creating not just places for people to stay, but also now they've gotten into experiences. You have all kinds of crazy experiences, like there's axe throwing, a place you can go to and you can have, you can throw axes against targets. All kinds of game rooms that are cropping up, creating a new experience for bars and drinking, whether that's like, you know, a friend of mine in San Francisco is just now opening up a barcade. There's this huge, you know, but it's in an old theater, so it's in this really cool space. And then you have tours. So there is such a growth and interest in tours, in being able to craft experiences that people can't really get on their own. So there's an entire book written that's called The Experience Economy by Pine and Gilmore, and basically they're saying that so the Industrial Revolution happened, the next economy was the service economy, and that the next era is this experience economy where everything is around creating memories, creating memorable events. And even like a business, it can't just be selling a product, it has to create a memory around it. So tours are part of this experience economy by making these unique experiences. So whether it's taking them through unique settings, like on our tours, we really try to have a level of a social dynamic. There's storytelling involved. We tell stories through visuals that we share on shared iPads, like old photographs and videos. Some of them incorporate food and drink. A lot of our tours incorporate a game. So it's about trying to create this very multi-dimensional kind of experience. And a lot of this goes into this bigger thing that people are talking about, this bigger movement that people are talking about in tourism, in immersive travel and experiential travel. So immersive travel being that people are really immersed in the unique culture, versus, and a lot of this has to do with authenticity. So like, for example, in Venice, which so many people, they go to Venice, Italy, and they say, oh, there, it's so beautiful and it's such a unique place, but it'd be so great if there weren't tourists. And, it's so hard to find in Venice an actual Venetian restaurant. You can find Italian restaurants where they've sort of catered their cuisine to a broader idea of what people expect out of Italian food, but Venetian cuisine is very unique to Venice. And also, like in the past, for example, maybe people would travel and they would go shopping. And they would go shopping at places that are specifically there for tourists. And this idea of immersive travel is really trying to integrate and allow people to have a unique experience of the place. Experiential tourism is defined as a holistic experience of culinary, culture, historic, shopping, nature, or social life. It can integrate all of these things, but and it's trying to be more holistic. And it's actually something that I really loved about working with Rick Steves too, is that it was really trying to get people into a more authentic space with tourism. So the qualifications for getting a job in tourism, it's really, really broad. So as far as studying what kinds of degrees you can have, people can come at this from all different disciplines. Business, anthropology, sociology, design, whether that's anything creative. It could be interior design or architectural, interior design, graphic design, history, studying actual architecture, music, engineering. I mean, when I talk about Chicago and this city, there's so many big ideas in engineering that are incredible. All kinds of sciences. People might not think of that as being so related, but there's so much science that goes behind understanding our environment, whether it's talking about like the ecology of the Chicago River, or I once created a tour that was about the everyday landscape around us, and it was winter, and so we talked about why is it that snow always looks blue. And then of course literature, because stories is just this basic human level at which we can all relate. When I started working with Rick Steves years ago, I was really surprised at all the different backgrounds of the people who worked as tour guides for that company. Some of the qualifications for a job in tourism as far as work experience is concerned, again, it can be all over the place. You have to know how to organize the more administrative aspects of the job, marketing, background in small business, nonprofit, education, management, managing projects specifically as well. Since an event, a tour is an event, and event planning, human resources, accounting, finance, sales, and customer service is really huge. That is one thing that I find can really differentiate someone who's great in working as a tour guide versus not as great, is that you ultimately have to have an understanding to be able to really relate with people. And sometimes we all know this from professors that we've had that are good versus bad. Sometimes professors would, they really, really know their stuff, but they really don't care as much about sharing it with other people, versus the ones who, really do resonate with us, or the ones that really wanted to connect and share. So, and that's, of course, I'm going a little bit more in the direction of my personal, idea on working as a tour guide, although we'll talk in a moment about what are the different kinds of jobs you can have. So professional skills, I think, ultimately, like with our tour guides, we really require that they have worked as an educator. that they know how to share bigger ideas. Background, of course, in public speaking and drama, but a lot of times people think, oh, well, I worked in, theater, but that's not necessarily always a background for being able to share stories about the city. Storytelling is really huge, background in writing as well. Any sort of, social skills, of course, are huge, being able to understand verbal as well as nonverbal communication, being able to, express and understand empathy. Of course, tourism you can find all kinds of niches as far as foreign language fluency. I speak Italian, but not many Italians really come to Chicago. And of course, organizational skills, critical thinking, and then also, as we're talking more about creative jobs in tourism, something that people are starting to value a lot more in the workforce, it seems, is imagination, is being able to come up with new ideas. So as far as different kinds of jobs you can have, and this is the sort of thing that I originally fell into this not knowing at all that you can have a job in tourism. So of course there's guidebook researching, and that tends to be seasonal. I've never really met anyone who just is a guidebook researcher. Unless, of course, there may be some, you live out somewhere in some country where the cost of living is really minimal. Travel writers, this often tends to be too more of a side job. It's very hard to break into. You got to do a lot of paying your dues, doing, very low paid kinds of jobs. But I have definitely met people that are very committed to it and have managed to get a job in travel writing. And it doesn't always just have to be specifically like a guidebook or writing an article for the New York Times or something. There's all kinds of websites that need content. For example, years ago, I did writing for a network of language schools. It was a website that was really trying to connect people with doing sort of like a travel abroad and studying the language for tourism. And so I got to write little blurbs about these unique locations. I'd never been to them per se, but it was a form of travel writing. Of course, being an entrepreneur, starting your own business. Another thing that's really huge, a lot of people are trying to figure out how are apps and how we use our smartphones, how is this changing travel? And what you have is that there's a lot of app developers that are creating these apps, and they're computer people, and they're in front of screens a lot. And one of the things I think people forget, it's something that is a huge qualification in working in tourism, is that you've traveled. I meet a lot of people who love the idea of working in travel, and of course everybody loves taking a break from work. There's another thing for it to be something that you have to do and is almost, compulsory, that you travel. And one of the things I find with a lot of these apps, they're made by people who work on computers. They're not made by people who travel and really understand the travel experience on a deeper level. Photography. So I think there's some creative ways that one can, try to get involved in travel through photography. Rick Steves, for example, has a resident photographer that will go on some of the trips with him. Also has been coming on some of his shoots for his television show. And really, he's not traveling all year round. He's definitely being able to have a career as a photographer. Now, I have to mention that my former employee, Pavel, he's a photographer, and he actually left us a few months ago to go on a trip around the world for 2 years. No one's paying him to do it per se. But I connected him, for example, with a project in a small town in Belize where I'm kind of looking at maybe creating a trip to. And they've got all kinds of amazing things down there. It's a fishing village. It's got a chocolate farm, and it's beautiful, and there's really interesting architecture. So he took photos of that location. And there's a lot of places that really need photography involved in travel, and everything around travel now is very visual. Instagram, lots of images. There's also people who have been able to create a job out of blogging about their travel. It's pretty exceptional, but they commit to it and they get to a point where they have people hosting them in cities and kind of paying for their experience, and then they also have enough traffic to their website that they can make money off of the ad content. Another thing can be video producer, along the lines of photography. Of course, everything is going towards video. And of course, you can be a tour guide. So some of these creative jobs in tourism can be a side job, and some of them can be full-time. So Airbnb Experiences just launched maybe, well, at least for Chicago, it launched maybe like 4 or 5 months ago. And this is crafted around the idea that you are having a unique experience specific to the person who's hosting it. So people are creating all kinds of experiences, like learn how to create your own podcast, doing bar trivia, having, learning about what goes into being a DJ, and taking, doing photography. So all these very unique experiences that are specific to the place and specific to the host. And we were hoping to get involved with this, but the thing is, I have employees, and there's a bunch of us that do the tours, and it wouldn't work within their format because the host has to be the one doing the experience all the time. There's also a big growth in all of these websites that are connecting local tour guides with people who want an experience from a local. And again, this use of the word local is so much a part of this hyper-local tourism movement. There's also going to be, like this website is creating content specifically. It's not about tour guides, but it's going to be creating content that is very specific to the place. And, they are trying to solicit getting writers. My guess is, doesn't really start out with pay, but part of the aspect of this world that we live in, as far as journalism is concerned, is that you have to do a lot of kind of create, hone your craft, sometimes for free, very low pay, before you can start to get the actual paid jobs out of it. Another thing to do is partner with another institution, like Atlas Obscura is going to be a website that has websites all around the country, and they do really cool, very unique tours. And in this case, the institution could be Atlas Obscura, but also working with specifically, it could be a park. Could be a museum, it could be a specific building or a nonprofit, kind of thinking about what are those businesses and institutions that already have a network and that need someone to tell their story. Then there's also starting your own company. So here is this sort of ultimate example of travel for locals, Chicago for Chicagoans. I believe this is the founders, it's a side job. Kind of a thing. And the funny thing is, I still get today people saying, is this really your day job? And yes, it's much more than a day job. There's so many little companies like this since I started in 2010 that have popped up like this, where people really want to get involved in this growth in tourism and really telling the story that is unique to your place. So this one, for example, is really having people tell stories about their neighborhood. So like I want to really do one that's about my neighborhood, which is Avondale. And let me just see if there's anything else I want to say on that note. All right. So then a big thing as far as working in tourism is that you have to gravitate to a niche. So there are so many of these. I'm not going to go through all of them, but a very big one is food and drink. Everyone, the rise of interest in whether it was like breweries that I was talking about, whether it has to do with local people making artisan foods or local restaurants. I wanted to put this example up here because Windy City Tour Company is another University of Chicago graduate who started this company. And then here's just a list of some of the options that people are talking about. Adventure travel, that's going to have to do, it's very sporty and active, it could be something like a rock climbing trip. Then you have sort of gender specific, where there's like women only travel, or there's what they call mancations. I love that word. And retreats, basically travel where people are trying to get away from it all. Family travel, it could be anything from like multi-generational, where there's whole generations of families traveling together, things that cater to kids. And then at the bottom of the list, I mean, there's just so many specific directions that you can take this idea. Yoga, art, sustainability, a charitable trip, like Habitat for Humanity, going somewhere and helping build. The list goes on, but you have to have a niche. So the last idea I want to talk about is making an experience, because that's ultimately what working in travel is all about. And let me explain a little bit this diagram. So there's this idea that there are 4 realms of an experience, and they kind of fall within these different levels of being more active, more passive, having more absorption versus immersion. And let me explain the 4 different quadrants here. So like an educational experience is it could be increasing a traveler's specific skills and enhancing his or her knowledge through some sort of participative activity. That could be something like learning how to DJ, like for our example that we were just looking at. An aesthetic experience can be there's something unique about the physical experience. Could be the places you go to, being in a certain setting, could be something very visual that you're looking at. The escapist element is going to be that it's getting you out of your normal experience of life, and usually that's kind of the most easy, especially if someone's just traveling in general. And people assign these 4 realms of an experience. You could take this to a store and talk about what the experience is there. It can be used in all kinds of different realms. And then the entertainment means that you're watching some sort of a performance. So that can be, it's more passive than the educational, but there can be some sort of a learning element to it. So what people are talking about with experiences and this rise in experience and how this is a part of travel is what makes it creative is, of course, basically being able to integrate all 4 of these elements. And you see how in the center of the image there is this sort of glowing light. That is because that's the sweet spot. So the idea is that if you can incorporate all of those elements into your experience, it becomes something bigger and greater. So it's going to be mixing an element of something physical, something sensory. There needs to be a complexity to it, and also elements of surprise too. Like the surprise can be part of the escapist element, the physical is part of the aesthetic, sensory can be part of the entertainment, and complexity is part of the educational. So I don't mean to be getting too complicated here, but the idea is that when you hit this sweet spot, there is this serendipitous moment when a person becomes, they feel like they are part of the destination. They feel like something is added to their own sense of self, their own personality, and that then they really become an addition to the place that they're in. This can also be a lot of what I'm talking about is another big buzzword that's out there is placemaking. And I actually did a whole presentation on how tourism is a part of placemaking too. But that's a whole other talk. So basically, in conclusion, there are a lot of different ways to get into tourism. There is a big rise in being unique in tourism. That's where the creativity can come in, creating your own niche. The more interdisciplinary, I think, the better. The more that it can kind of incorporate into this sort of, realms of experience and being able to create an experience that really appeals to all kinds of different parts of a person's brain. And that basically concludes what I wanted to talk about. And I've also got my contact here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Please continue to bring in your questions. Type them into the question box. I do have one for you right now. What do you think the future of tourism looks like and is headed, and the biggest threats and opportunities for the industry?
That is an awesome question. So there, as far as threats and opportunities, I mean, one of the things that I have to always have in the back of my mind as a business owner is going to be an economic downturn. The development is out of control right now, and things are just seem to be accelerating at a very shocking rate, and history says that will happen. But one of the interesting things about hyperlocal tourism is that when there's an economic downturn, it means that people have more staycations, and they are going to be doing things that are more close to home. So that's kind of one of the interesting aspects of working in hyperlocal tourism. I wish I had my team and I actually, we had a really awesome kind of retreat a couple months ago, and we did our whole SWOT analysis, but I don't have that right in front of me. But other kinds of opportunities, of course, is going to have to do with, I feel like content is a really huge thing. Creating unique content, and that's something that I always battle about. I mean, I have a million ideas and so many stories I want to tell. What's the best format? Is it a documentary film? Is it a blog post? Is it a tour? The travel content can go in so many different directions, and of course, one of the biggest opportunities that people are looking at are how are people using their phones when they travel. And I think that, people are trying to figure this out, and I don't think they've quite got it figured out yet, as far as like, I'm not remembering the name of the Google app that was created. It's like Study something, but it's trying to connect people in a hyper-local way to stories around them. There's also going to be a really interesting one. What is the name of it? It's started by Anijo Matthews. Vamonde. Vamonde, Vamonde, is another app that's trying to do the same thing, and it's really cool, but it isn't just quite catching on. So I think that there's definitely a big opportunity as far as the technology changing as well to get into travel in a unique way. Yeah, I think that would, and as far as just a general answer to what is the future of travel, it's like the way, I think that a lot of it really is moving towards this interest in very unique destinations. and whether that's going to a very unique place or going to somewhere like Paris, but having an experience that you cannot find on your own. I'm of the generation where when you traveled, you used Lonely Planet, and that was your guidebook, and that independent travel, I think, is definitely a thing. People want to make their own experience to a certain degree. But I think too that things really are moving towards people understanding that they want a curated experience. They want someone else who they're too busy to plan their trip or figure out how to make it totally amazing and over the top. So I think this idea of very niche, very curated, very unique is also a big part of the future of travel.
Thank you. You were talking about experience and niche experiences. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most uniquely memorable or niche travel experiences that you have been a part of?
Ooh. Oh, wow. I mean, there's been so much. One of the more frequent things, I went through to on a trip to Mexico City earlier this year, that was held through the Illinois Institute of IIT Institute of Design, and it was called a strategy tour, and it was this trip that really integrated kind of exploring business and entrepreneurship and creativity in other cities. And it was, designed, and they actually did a bunch of these. They've done them in Detroit and South America. And anyway, I went on the one in Mexico City, and one of, I think, the most memorable aspects of the trip for all of us is that we got to go, we went to a Mexico City prison where the prisoners have a theater, and and the public can come and pay for tickets to be able to go there. And it was really awesome to be able to see a prison. I mean, I've been inside prisons here in the States. I used to teach art classes in them, and to see that they have a playground so that families can come into the prison and spend time, instead of being in a cold little room sitting on a bench with your child, that you can play on a playground, and just being able to experience that, and then also to be able to see how theater was used in a means of therapy. So I think what made that experience unique is that we were able to really kind of understand the culture in a deeper way. We were able to get access into a space that we would never be able to imagine doing, and we were also able to connect with people on a very deep level about something that's positive in their life. That was really awesome. And the tough part, I've had so many amazing experiences with friends or in Italy, and especially when Italy is where I was, of course, working with Rick Steves, and there's I think no matter what, the experiences that are going to pop out are going to be the ones where you have a personal connection in some way. I mean, there's certainly some meals I could talk about too, but ultimately, even if the food is amazing, it's gonna have to do with the company that you're with. I think has a lot to do with that.
Thank you. And one last question before we close up today for our Chicago audience. Can you tell us what your favorite current or right now Chicago hidden gem is, either through a tour you're doing or something else in the city that's really catching your eye right now?
Oh, wow. Oh, there's so many. I'm trying to think of something that might be newer that I've discovered. I mean, I have my kind of all-time favorites. One of them is going to be Johnny O's. It's a hot dog joint at 35th and Morgan. And you'd look at it and you'd say, whatever, it's just a hot dog joint. And instead, the stories behind that place and who Johnny was is really awesome. And there's even a hidden like eating area, what used to be a bar back before Spiegel's catalog closed. That's really special. Also, the mural from an old jazz club in Bronzeville. We take people to on our jazz and blues tour. That's actually, the whole building has been changed. And then as far as a unique area of the city, one that I'm just really wanting to learn more about and kind of intrigued of maybe creating some kind of tour around, is going to be this block on Clark Street, just south of Van Buren. And this area here, right by my office actually, where it's kind of like Chicago from 20 years ago. And it's actually, I believe they're working on a historic landmark designation for this block. It was actually long ago a little Chinatown, and it maintains, you know, everything downtown has become so glossy and new and redeveloped, and you know, giant high rises everywhere. And this is this interesting little block that, you know, when I walk by it, it reminds me of like when I was a kid and would, you know, come into the city and visit Chicago, and not in a romanticized way, because I mean, but it's just, it's a part of history that I think is a really interesting little block that a lot of people don't know about.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to our time today. Thank you so much for leaving us with that beautiful image and a thing to check out in Chicago. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so
And
much
thank you everyone for joining in today with your questions. Please visit our website for more Career Month offerings, and we look forward to seeing you around. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thank you.